Good morning, everybody. We're so excited to be here and to be doing this. These Zoom panel discussions have been a really inspiring and beautiful way for us to stay connected and keep our minds active and ourselves inspired during these kind of bleak, uncertain times. So thank you for joining, and a big thank you to this incredible group. I'm a huge fan of everyone here. I think all of us are. I mean, it's if you're here today, it's because you love color, and I think we can all vouch for the fact that the world needs beautiful color more than ever. And color is such a powerful thing. And I think we all talk about color and loving color, but what does color really mean? What is the power of color? What are the emotions of color? I always refer to happy colors, sad colors, but it's so subjective. So I think today is kind of an interesting way to explore, the subjective and the objective aspects of color and how all of our lives in so many ways, whether you're creative or not, are really influenced and molded and shaped, our memories, our passions, by color and the world's use of color, man's use of color, nature's use of color. So we've got a list of great conversation topics that you guys have submitted that I'm going to ask the group. It's going to be really, really casual. We're just going to be unstructured about this, and I'll let people kind of jump in. If anyone in the audience has questions, as Jody mentioned, please send them, and they'll forward them to me to get to at the end. But I'm going to start off with just a really easy one, and that's to everyone, and we'll just kind of go through the group. And that is, what is your earliest memory of color? And something I would encourage everyone who's watching to do as well is kind of answer these questions for yourselves as we go along. It's kind of it'll be an interesting exercise, I think. So why don't we start with you, Jamie, because you're the first square on my screen and my viewer. What is your earliest memory of color?
I have to say, I think I would go back to the house that I was born into, that I lived in with my parents and brothers until I was about 4 years old. And there was a huge border of black-eyed Susans in the backyard. And the intensity of that marigold, which is heightened by the texture, because color also reacts differently with texture, that velvety texture of the petals, and that almost black but actually deep chocolate brown center, I think, is my earliest color memory.
Great, I love that. I love marigold. That yellow marigold is one of the most electric colors to me. Lee, what's your earliest memory of color?
Well, I have to say that mine was a little bit more eccentric, in that my mother was a demon with a paintbrush, and she didn't believe in spring cleaning. She believed in repainting the house every year. And so I lived in Baltimore in one of those little row houses. And so I remember her taking the paintbrush out, a new can of paint, and I never knew what the color was going to be for the year, but it was always such fun because there was that expectation. And she also allowed me to do my room in whatever color I chose. And I remember one year I chose Chinese red, black, and white. And the proviso was that I got to choose whatever color I wanted to, except guess who would change the color when I got tired of it. I had to do the grunt labor, but it was a wonderful way to grow up. I had total freedom with color.
That's a story I've heard from a lot of creative friends I have and designers, that their parents gave them kind of free reign over the decoration and organization of their bedroom when they were growing up. My parents did as well. And what about, is that true for anyone else on here, that you were allowed to kind of play and decorate?
I was not allowed to play or decorate. Definitely not. But it's something I really believe in now, because I have so many clients who want their houses to be completely neutral and very, very sort of staid. And I just always encourage them to at least let their child have some colour inside a cupboard, or, in a little, even inside a drawer, something where that child can express themselves. Because it seems so sad to me that, as a child, you can't express yourself with colour.
Yeah, I had a experience when I was about 9. It was time my mother decided that the house should be redecorated, and that I already had an interest in this. And so she said I was helping her choose all the different things throughout the house, the wallpapers and the colors. And I was quite insistent in my room that I wanted black patent leather walls. And she was like, no. And I said, no. And she said, well, how about chocolate brown or burgundy or Oxford green? I said, no, it's black or nothing. The room doesn't need to be redone. I was a very willful child. And I very happily lived with those black patent leather vinyl walls until I went away to college.
Well done, you got the patent leather walls.
I did.
Does anyone else, before we go to the next question, would anyone else like to share an early memory of color?
Sure. My parents are both architects, and so all of our houses have always been white. All of the walls are just white, very clean lines, and they dressed in the architect's uniform of blue, black, and white. And when we went on summer holidays, my dad used to wear an all green outfit occasionally with green matching espadrilles as a kind of breakout look. And I remember calling it his frog look, and we were like 3 or 4 and thought it was hilarious when he'd wear his green summer look. So that, yeah, is my standout color memory.
Ribbit. That brings back memory.
Oh, sorry. My favorite thing as a child was my father brought me this very big set of Caran d'Ache crayons, and they were literally, it was like I might have been given the crown jewels. I was so excited, but I never ever used them. I just used to play around with them, putting them in different orders to see how the color combinations worked. You know, how ridiculous that I never actually got them out and used them. I just wanted them there in that tin, looking gorgeous.
My earliest memory was I had I guess, what is it, Fisher Price, like a little kid plastic picnic table. It was plastic, yellow and orange with the little bench seats. And I remember sitting in my backyard coloring, and we lived in like a suburban house, and it was very, I think, safe colors everywhere and in the neighborhood, except for this garish bright yellow and orange, which I can like so vividly recall in summer memories.
I now battle that with my children. I am constantly sending their toys up the staircase so that they don't visually pollute my living room.
Visually pollute. I like that expression. I can use that.
My favorite thing I've heard so far was Joe, the idea of a little boy or a little girl picking out the color for inside a drawer or cabinet that's their secret color.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
And I think the great thing is that then the mother can shut it very firmly and pretend it's not there. So it is like the child's secret, and it's something I do all the time. And I genuinely think it brings them joy, these kids, actually.
Yes. I would like to recommend a book that I don't even know if it's available anymore, but it's called In My Room. And it was written by a wonderful friend of mine, Tony Torres, in San Francisco, who unfortunately has since passed away. But Tony's whole attitude, and he was quite schooled in this, he worked with children all the time, was to always allow children to choose their own colors. They have a sense of color, it's instinctive, they feel more comfortable when you allow them to be creative, and that you should never really hamper whatever their creativity is. It's a marvelous book if you can get your hands on it. Tony Torres, Torrice, and it was written maybe about 12 years ago, but it still holds up.
That's really interesting.
Great,
My 4-year-old son is passionate about pink. Everything, toothbrush, socks, everything needs to be pink. Much to my sort of husband's initial sort of dismay, and now we're just going with it, and he's very happy.
It's just
Your son expressive still? Yeah.
I think to have that opinion is just so important, whether it doesn't matter what the color is, but the fact that he's
exactly.
But I also think that
exactly
throughout life, your tastes evolve, and you have to go through the different phases. And so if Jamie didn't get to do his black patent leather room when he was a child and get that out of his system, he very well could be just now entering that chapter of his life.
He could have the black patent leather cupboard.
People are allowed to start experimenting with colors, trying out phases, overdosing on a certain color, and then moving on and evolving. It's really important.
Well, as black is all color together, so I was diving into the palettes deeply, but it was black.
Okay, the next question, guys, is one that's it's a big one, and it's kind of broad, but all of us look to color for inspiration. We all use color in our work in very different ways. But one consistent and one common thread is that we have to first identify those colors. We have to find that inspiration in colors. So whether it's for an interior or an image or a dress, the question is, what is that starting point? Where do you guys look to find new and exciting colors or new color combinations? Is it travel? Is it in the garden? Where are the places you kind of go to when you're stuck and you need that spark of color inspiration?
Well, I know for me, I mean, it goes back sort of one stage further, because I'm looking for inspiration to create colours for Farrow Ball to sell. And those can come from a myriad of different places. I mean, lots and lots of them come from nature, because I think that's what we feel connected to now. But I mean, it's been as weird as my daughter's pink cheeks, or, you know, I can look at some fabulous piece of art. I mean, I used to be obsessed with Rothko, and look at Rothko and just see how those color combinations work. So I think it's what you literally just see color everywhere, and that's what's inspiring. It just might be an advertising hoarding.
So Joa, but when you do that, when that happens, because I have this question because I don't know the answer. How do you record those colors? How do you make notes? If you're sitting there and you see your daughter's perfect pink cheeks and you want to remember that exact shade, do you run in and grab a Pantone book? What are you doing? How do you mentally remember it?
It is literally mentally, and that people often ask me that, but I can remember a color for weirdly for many years. There's a recent color we brought out called Ranguali, which is a really sort of bright pink, very adventurous color. And that came from some powder which was thrown at my husband when we got caught up in the Indian festival of Holi, the Hindu festival, and they throw this powder at you. And that was in 1990. And I could remember that, well, maybe I've got it wrong, but I could remember in my head exactly what that color was, 28 years later.
That's incredible.
So the answer is, no, I don't write anything down. It's just completely somehow lodges in there.
Well, I think that anyone who is involved in color, it all starts in childhood, as we know. But I think that those who have that special talent, as the many people who are involved today all do, we find that we have a better color memory. And it is true, a color can become implanted in your mind and it stays with you. Of course, for me, it's very easy because I have every Pantone book that was ever made. So I can always rush and get that Pantone swatch and put it on the paper. But it is a matter of storing it away in your memory bank. And I think anyone with a talent for color has that ability to remember color better than most.
That's interesting, Lee. I've never known that, but I feel that I do have that ability. And when I'm taking notes, and I do sometimes write things down, if a client has a rug that we're going to be working with, and if I write down a specific name for the color, Prussian blue versus cobalt blue, in my mind it triggers very close that color.
Mm-hmm.
But it's triggering the color that you think about, because your version of cobalt blue and my version of cobalt blue might be totally different. So it's exactly the same thing, actually.
And in fashion, actually, that's something we wrestle with all the time, because every season we have to name our whole color card, right? So the colors we have to name, give them the seasonal names. And it's one of the most time-consuming processes of the entire collection, because you're there with a group of people from merchandising and design, and the way you're describing colors is so subjective, and we all have such a different idea of it. And we need to come up with names that sound unique and like they haven't been exhausted and overused, but at the same time can give someone on e-commerce looking at the clothes on a website an idea of what that color really looks like. So that's something we should come back to. Is, Jamie, an amazing point, actually, the how we use language to describe color. And
the romance of it.
It's very romantic. It's
not much more delicious than brown.
And Joa, I have to admit, I constantly look at the names that Farrow and Ball uses. I think they do beautiful names.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, that's almost, no, that's ridiculous. I mean, the colors and the names work absolutely in tandem, but I really love doing the names. And they, they're not done as a joke. They have real sort of gravitas behind them.
I think the challenge with naming is the number of colors you have to name at one time. I can remember when we were doing a job for a big paint company, and they came to us and said, we're going to eventually have, if you can believe this, 20,000 colors that will be available. We're going to start out with just a small number, but we want to have names reaching into the future. And I had to with many people helping me, come up with all of these names. It nearly drove me crazy because at first it sounds like fun and games. Oh, we're coming up with names. But then after you realize you've exhausted the supply of much of what you have and you have to go back and find even more inspiration, it's not fun and games anymore. But if you're just naming a few, then you can have fun with it.
Then the thesaurus comes in handy.
Yes, exactly.
There.
What about you, Quentin? Where do you look for color inspiration?
So I was going to say, for me, colors come alive in their relationship to other colors. And I love visual contrast and like juxtapositions almost between colors. And I love really deep colors with very pale, desaturated colors, or sort of accidental colors meeting each other. And I've always been obsessed with sort of ripped posters and hoardings and how you get the different colors that weren't meant to be in the same adverts meeting each other, you know, when you're walking down the street. And I'll just get out my phone and just take pictures of parts of, you know, where the different posters are ripped through and stuff. And that can be pretty inspiring for like a visual for a new project.
I love that. Like that it's more about the combinations themselves are kind of.
It's about, yeah, the combinations and like accidental combinations, like not ones that are meant to be like visually pleasing together sometimes are like the most powerful.
I mean, sorry, go ahead, Jamie.
I'm with Quentin on that, is that I think I'm fascinated by how things react to each other. And again, back to youth, as a child and a teenager, I love the work of Gene Davis and Kenneth Nolan. And I think about how that came forward to my current appreciation of Chuck Close and Thomas Roof. And that's really about how the colors crash together and how they react with each other. And I think that's what fascinates me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like you, Quentin. I think because I don't work in interiors, I love looking at shelter magazines or interior books at some of the color combinations, because I think the way you have to approach color combinations, Jamie, when you're doing a space that people are living in is very different than when you're thinking of a dress. Yeah. So sometimes the combinations I think are kind of unexpected then for fashion. So I'm constantly tearing out pages, actually, Quentin, which is bad. I don't use my phone because I'd rather have like the real paper texture.
So you just, right, get the actual thing. No, that's
so
good.
All the like beautiful coffee table books, if you flip through them, are missing lots of pages.
Yeah, and then the colors that are like nice to look at in a painting or a picture, you don't want to wear them always either. So I've sometimes been asked to do, you know, t-shirts or prints for dresses or like things like that, and people are like, we just want it to feel like your work. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't want to wear my work. It's a different thing. It's a different medium. Different colors translate differently depending on how you're digesting them.
It's like a good segue to.
It's an easy way to explain to people. It's like particularly people who get very obsessed with having white trim, or they want their baseboards always to be white. And you say, well, you know, if you're wearing a beautiful red dress, would you wear white shoes with it? You know, there is parallel with that. You know, because why do we want to look at this little sort of mean little white line around the bottom? It's like drawing your attention to a white shoe. Same thing.
Well, if we think about color, it's rarely used in isolation. We usually, when we use color, we use it in combination with other colors. And I think for anyone who works with color and appreciates color, that's really the fun part. It's creating the combinations to get them to work. And when people ask me, well, what makes the best combination? I always say the best combination is what lies within your head. When you look at it, it has to please you. It is not an edict that I pronounce. This combination must be used. And I've tried to give that opinion in my books too. You know, a lot of it has got to come from you. Even though people feel they don't have the talent with color, the talent lies within. You just have to have some guidance sometimes and some help. But you also have to please yourself, particularly in the area that you're living in. The colors have to speak to you. When you walk in a room, you have to say, I love being in this room. And if you don't, it's probably time to change the colors.
I think that you mentioned before, Wes, about when you get stuck. And I don't think I ever get stuck for ideas. Where I get stuck is finding that thing that will juxtapose against something else, the right exact perfect shade. That's where I can really torture something and say, okay, I've got the base fabric and the B, but then I want to throw in the C like a painter, like just a slash of red on a canvas that's primarily cool tones, and finding that exact same shade. Like great artists, they don't tend to just use the paint right out of the tube. You're mixing it to get exactly the piquancy you want.
Hmm. But then it's so dependent, Jamie, isn't it, on the light within that space? You know, that can just twist that color combination so incredibly quickly. I mean, I put things together where I think they're perfect, and I get them into the room, and because the light, you know, perhaps it was west facing when I thought it was south facing, and just that whole, it blows up in my face. I've got to start again.
I guess it's like lipstick. How many hundreds of thousands of shade of red lipstick there are, but what looks good with your complexion in your climate is what's really special, and about what makes the choice so so unique to you.
Right. I kind of think that the question of what is your favorite color is a grossly oversimplified question, because it should really be, it shouldn't just be what is your favorite color of lipstick, because it could be a color of a lipstick just in a tube, not on a face. But then you could take it further. What is your favorite color of lipstick for a brunette? What is your favorite color of lipstick for a brunette at nighttime? What is your favorite color of lipstick for a brunette at nighttime in a red dress? I mean, it can get so much more nuanced. And I find that when someone asks that question, in my opinion, my go-to answer if someone just asks that question, and I don't want to get into the philosophy of it, is I'll say blue. But I don't know about you guys. I feel like every color can be your favorite color for something different at a different time in a different place.
And in a different combination.
And with what we do, we sometimes have a client say, oh, I don't like green. But somehow I think that just the right ocean or cerulean or sage is what's needed in a room. And as long as, back to choosing words carefully, just don't call it green, call it something else, they can see it and be open to it.
How many times do we say the word plaster instead of pink? I do it the whole time. Or, you know, a blush color, but you know, the P word, pink, can really turn people off. So yeah, I mean, it's such an important point about going back to that language thing. Yes. And just how relatable colors are.
Yes, absolutely. And it's true when people have absolute feelings about a color and will say, well, nothing brown. Absolutely can't have anything brown. But if you were to walk in the room that they are currently inhabiting, they may have grandma's beautiful armoire that has been handed down from generation to generation. It's a beautiful walnut shade. Essentially, it's brown. Maybe their floors are brown. You know, maybe they've eaten a chocolate sundae that they love, and it's brown. So I think if you kind of open up the client's awareness of where color is used and how it's used, it's really a learning experience for them. And it can be quite exciting for them to learn that, yes, there are other ways that color can be used. When people ask me what my favorite color is, I always say, you know, that's like asking me my favorite child, you know, because every color has some redeeming feature. It's a question of how and where it's used, the context. In real estate, it's location, location, location. And with color, it's context, context, context.
And mood might differ day to day.
Right.
You know, I think that my feeling about color is been different the last 11 weeks than pre-coronavirus pandemic.
That's
Definitely.
interesting, Jamie. Yeah. Why do you feel that how's it changed?
Well, first of all, I'm not dressing as much. I'm not layering things. I'm not putting a jacket on and having a pocket square and thinking about how it relates to the shirt and the pants and the socks and the shoes. There's not those components. And so it's all sort of simplified down. And without that armor, I've sort of gotten quieter.
Quieter colors.
Yeah. I'm dressed up today in my Pushing the Season printed linen shirt that I bought in Capri last summer. So I'm on vacation with all of you. And it's a little brighter than I've been wearing, which has been mostly gray and navy. I have not been wearing my typical black though. Maybe that's, I'm fighting against going into some Baroque moody place.
I'm the other way around because I find at work, I don't know if you find this, Lee, that I always wear black or navy just because there's no distraction then for, if I'm showing colours. So I have been delighting, all the way through lockdown in wearing the most garish clothes I can possibly find. Every morning my husband says to me, wow, look, what's that? Because I'm pulling out all these things he hasn't seen for years.
Mm-hmm. I wonder what everybody else is wearing when they're in lockdown. the other members.
Some newscasters not wearing their pants.
Guys, I think we were doing a little show and tell project, right? I think Jody asked everyone to bring an object that kind of represents you from a color perspective. Quentin, were you able to find one?
Yeah. So this is just what I thought represented how I was feeling today. And let's see how big it is when I bring it to the screen. It is a little self-portrait I did a while ago. And I like the sort of how the red and pink meet, and then against the kind of cooler gray tones in it, and also against more muted pinks. So I was into all the different pink and red combinations right now. And maybe it's sort of slightly representing the kind of mild under bubble of like angry energy at the moment to get stuff started again.
Pink and red is angry energy?
Maybe with black.
I'm working on the resort collection right now, and we're doing a lot of pink and red combos. I think I love pink and red combinations. It's one of my favorite combos.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie, Joa, Lee, does anyone else have an object?
I have. I mean, this is a little bit weird, but it's just something I wanted to show because these are the tools of my trade. Everybody kind of thinks that I must sit in a sort of huge factory, laboratory, creating colours. And actually, I just sit at a table, usually my kitchen table, with a little bowl and a load of hot teaspoons. That's how we mix the colours. It's radically low tech and artisan. And it's something I think at the moment we all have that feeling we want to be, we're not interested in things which are kind of huge. It's quite nice to think about being at your kitchen table, just mixing up a colour. So that was just, I thought that's what said something about me at the moment. And
you're mixing them from the dry pigment, or you're mixing them?
No, not from dry, no, from existing Farrow sample pots and things. So, it's a long, long process, but that's how it starts, with a little bowl and a spoon.
It's great.
Beautiful.
I do have a collection, and I hope that you're going to be able to see.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Isn't that gorgeous? These are from my garden on Bainbridge Island. This is the time of the year that we all look forward to because the colors just come bursting forward. And I'm going to turn it around so that you can see some of the variations of the colors. Is that not gorgeous, the hydrangeas? I think that the garden, of course, is inspirational for me. And I, even more than the hydrangeas, I think than the rhodies, are the hydrangeas. I keep calling them hydrangeas. These are rhodies. Of course, excuse anybody out there who's looking at this and thinking, she's a gardener and she doesn't know the difference. Anyhow, the hydrangeas to me are the perfect flower because they are an expression of evolvement. And it's a little soon for our hydrangeas. That's why you saw the rhodies. They're a question of, bursting forward when they're in the little buds, they're one color. And then they come out and they're full and their color gets even more intense. And then as the season wanes and you get closer into fall, they start to fade. And to me, there's nothing more gorgeous than a faded hydrangea. So you're taking the one flower, the one object of color, and you are really changing it through evolvement. It's sort of like an expression of life, if you think about that, being a child and then bursting forth with all the energy and then gradually, as the fading process happens, we fight against it. But nevertheless, that to me is just so emblematic, and the colors of the hydrangeas are exquisite.
Beautiful. So mine is this very special pillow that has a story behind it. It was handmade, hand embroidered by a friend of mine, a very dear friend, who also happens to be a client. And it really is all about that huge juxtapositions of colors next to each other. And she based the whole thing and the palette on this enormous Thomas Roof photograph that I have hanging over the sofa in my living room. And so this comes down onto the sofa, it comes out of the painting in a different scale and a different pattern in a way, but inspired by it. And the fact that this very busy person, it took her a year to do this, to find the time, but that she spent the time and found it to make this very special pillow for me is really, really is special.
I brought two options, and Lee, I kind of took a page out of your book, and I have a flower, a little ranunculus, in a beautiful pink. And to me, two of the hardest colors to capture that I see in nature that I always want to try to capture in fabric are that fresh green, like the green of the leaves you just held up, Lee, that I can see it so clearly in my head, whether it's fresh spring grass or the leaves of a tulip or the leaves of a ranunculus, but it's to actually capture that same energy and life, at least in a fabric, I find to be incredibly difficult. Green sometimes falls very flat and green in a way that's really hard to replicate. But I love pink, and I love this very cold pink. I love pink in all its iterations, from a warm pink to a cold pink. And then the other thing I brought, my husband's a glass blower. And so this is one of his pieces. And what I love about them is there's something really organic about the combinations, because he's working really quickly, because the glass is molten and you can't keep going back and revisiting it. So he has to quite impulsively and without too much thought or planning add in the color elements and mix the combinations. And the results are often very unexpected and beautiful. And I find that had he had weeks to sit there and tinker with it and keep revisiting the combination, it might not be as interesting. But because he only has seconds before the glass hardens, he has to just really quickly throw cobalt blue in with that teal, and it ends up being something quite beautiful. And I think sometimes it's a good memory. I like to keep that in mind, because I think when we overthink things, sometimes we have a tendency to get a little safe. And if you just go with your first raw reaction,
I agree completely. I think, it's all with color, things are very often just instinctive. So, and it's the first thing you think of, when you walk into a room, for me, I just find it kind of hits me what I think would work best. And then, as Jamie says, you might have to talk the client round, but I think it is all about instinct.
And, that's interesting, because that goes back to what we were talking about with children. I mean, when you're asking a child what color they want their room, it's all instinct. It's all just a pure desire. It's not about what color their neighbors will like in their room, or what color they think is appropriate, or what will be flattering. It's just instinctive. It's just about joy. It's Jamie saying he wanted black patent leather. It's not overthinking it.
And it gave me joy.
I love that. Let's see.
It's interesting, Wes, if I can interject, when you talk
Please.
about children and their instinct, it is true, as young children, we're very instinctual about the colors that we choose. But it starts in about the pre-adolescent years, particularly with girls, when if you ask them what a favorite color is, they often wait to hear what their best friend is saying is their favorite color, and then they will duplicate that color. And that's when, unfortunately, other influences start to enter in and kind of take over our childhood instincts. I remember doing a talk once to a young group of kids who were pre-adolescents. And I asked the first little girl, when she came up, to choose a favorite color out of this whole assemblage that I had. Her teacher was a student of mine, and that's how I got to the class. And she had on gray sweats, and it was very casual at someone's house. And she said, my favorite color, and she looked down at her outfit and she said, gray. And then the next little girl came up and I said, and your favorite color? Without hesitation, it's gray. Every girl in the group chose gray because the leader of the group, the first girl to get up and talk, had chosen the gray. And I think it's kind of sad because there is that point in time when peer pressure starts to set in and you start to lose, for not all of us, but start to lose that natural instinct, or you're so influenced by people around you that you're not paying attention to that little voice within your head that's telling you what you love. And hopefully when you reach maturity, and this happens for many people, they then go back to what is instinctive. And for those of us who become professionals in the field, we never lose that tendency.
I think that many people don't go back to the, I mean, they do just follow the crowd. I mean, the whole sort of grey mania that we've seen in the last 10 years or 8 years was just like one house after another. I would walk in houses and not know which one I was in because every single one was identical. It was just grey, weirdly, grey. And I think that's something which is great at the moment and possibly will be pushed even more because of this lockdown situation, is that we've gone away from grey. We're looking at things which just again give us a much more of a sort of great big hug, you know, the renaissance of earthier tones and stronger colours, and we don't need that white and grey in our lives anymore. But I mean, I watch people just follow each other doing grey every single day.
There is definitely like
they were arrested in that stage of their development, perhaps.
Joe, I always refer to happy colors, and I mean it's very subjective, but to me they're colors that are not sad. I can just look at a color and it either makes me feel happy or it makes me feel sad. It either feels like a muddy color that's where the pigments kind of trampled down and not really allowed to shine through and glow, or it's a happy color that's kind of proud and vivacious. And that can be a brown, that can be a gray. But I think there's just, to me, it's really about pure colors.
Yeah, what I would call clean colors.
Clean colors,
which, I mean, it's just, again, it's language, isn't it? But for some people, those sort of, what you're referring to as sadder colors are the things which they feel comfortable with. You know, that's what makes them comfortable. There's nothing they've got to react against.
I think this is a theme that's emerged throughout this whole conversation that we should explore a little bit, which is the idea of, it kind of, everyone's touched on it at one time or another, this idea that maybe people are afraid of color, that there's an aversion to certain colors, that so often what you all do is push people to kind of outside of their comfort zone when it comes to color, whether it's Joa talking about not using a white trim, or Jamie with green, or Quentin with certain combinations that are maybe unexpected. Do you think that's true? Do you think people are in general afraid of color?
I think for interiors, people are worried about making a mistake, aren't they? I mean, I know that's how I feel when it comes to my own home, because of the time and expense and effort that it takes to do your home. You don't want to make a mistake. So then people become very safe and guarded and stick to a formula.
But what do you mean by mistake? What is a mistake?
Like if you painted it a color and then once you get your sofa and carpets in, you realize it's too hectic or something. And you want to do something that you know will work, and it might be a formula you've seen before or something that you grew up with. For me, it's often white walls, and it's something that I would love to break out of a bit more, but there's definitely a comfort zone. Whereas with dressing, I dress in every color of the rainbow and love it and don't think twice about it.
Right, because the lifespan is shorter in theory of that dress than of your living room.
But I think the mistake sometimes is being too tentative, not really embracing something that you're excited about, and allowing yourself to experience that. You know, there are simple little baby steps you can take: a couple of throw pillows, a vase, a throw, a blanket. But you know, if you love something, you should give yourself that freedom to embrace it more fully.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And, you know, I used to say, bring in a throw pillow, you know, something that would be less expensive. I'm not suggesting they rip up the carpet flooring, you know, but just little touches. But, you know, in the last several years, what we've seen is that painting a wall is probably one of the least expensive ways to go, rather than ripping up the carpeting. It's so easy to do that. I mean, maybe it involves some grunt labor or having somebody come in and do it. But the point is it is, what is a mistake? Many people choose the word mistake because they're concerned about their peers and who might walk into the room and say, oh, well, that's kind of an interesting combination. I mean, you know the kind of snarky things people can do, sometimes very, they don't mean to be mean. It's just that it doesn't meet their sense of taste. And I think, Jamie, I would agree with you that we have to allow our own sense of style to come through and to be confident enough to know that it pleases us and we love living with it. And if someone else doesn't like it, that's their opinion. They don't have to use the same colors in their home. But it is such a great way to express ourselves. And if you do, have, this happens with paint all the time, we know this, you put the color up on the wall, it doesn't appear to be what it is in the swatch, and it's too vibrant, it just isn't right in the light of the room, then we buy another can of paint and we change it. It's not the worst thing that could happen.
Right.
But also, I'm a great believer in starting small. So, if you have a small, a bathroom or a small lobby, a small hall that you start your house with, express yourself there, and then perhaps, your bigger, reception rooms, you can go back to the more neutral things which you think are going to please your friends as well as you. But I mean, I think it's a good way to find out whether you can live with color is by doing something in a small space to start with.
You're quite right that changing the color of a room with paint is one of the less expensive ways to change something. And I think that leads you to say, me often with a client, well, we're doing all the furniture in more neutrals. And that allows you to change the color often, frequently, like you did growing up. And you're not reupholstering the sofa and changing the carpets and the rugs and the window treatments, which are the labor intensive and expensive items. Change the color of the walls again.
Exactly.
Change the color of your ceiling and your white room.
Yes, I love that idea.
I need no encouragement to change colors. I change the colors of my rooms literally monthly. So,
like Quentin, I have a big mood board on my office. It's about a wall that I use that's 8x10 cork. And the first couple of seasons at Herrera, I just kept it white and I just kept pinning new images to it. And I got bored with that after, I think, 2 seasons. And so I started going to the local, there's a paint store near the garment district, and I'd go just get a small can of paint. And each season now I painted a different color. So it's one shade kind of from the collection. And just the difference it makes to the images that I pinned to it, to have a non behind the images, it creates a whole different mood and a whole different story. I think after a few more seasons, though, the wall is going to be about like 3 inches thick of paint. Already it's really hard to like
And Wes, when you take everything down to repaint, do any of the images go back up, or those all go in a folder in the archives?
No, it goes in a folder. I start fresh each season. Sometimes I'll have 1 or 2 overlap, but then they'll be against a new background color and they take on a whole different meaning.
You can start to crack through the layers.
Yeah. Exactly.
You can start to crack through the layers.
Archaeologists will find this wall and be like, what was going on? So this is a question that was submitted by the group. And it's an interesting one. I'm usually lucky when I approach a color that I can kind of start from scratch with the season. Each season can be new. It's a clean slate. We can do a whole new selection of colors. However, there are cases where you're working, some of you, Jamie, if you're working with a client, a red dining room table, or Quentin, if you're doing a fashion shoot, for example, or story, and certain colors are already dictated to you by the client, like you're working with some structure already in place. Do you find that really limits your creativity, or how then do you approach color differently? Do you?
I love having I love having limit. Feel like it allows me to creatively react, and often I react quickly and instinctively, whereas when there are no limits at all, the endless possibilities can actually be stifling. So it's one of the things I love about my job is reacting to the ingredients that you're given. And I think if I was working in interiors, I wouldn't mind also.
I would agree in a certain sense is that having something given to you is a challenge to have it as a point of departure. I often talk about if a client has something that's really that I think is wrong / I'll say, why are we building a room around this and spending all this extra around this thing that doesn't really work? However, if they say, because it was my grandmother's and I love it and reminds me of her, I will jump handsprings to make it work. And because going back to sentiment and memory is so important in a palette as well.
That is such a great point. I love what you just said, Jamie. I feel very strongly about that, rather than coming in with an opinion because you look at a color and you feel that it's not exactly the color that might be right for the room, but you've got to question the client and find out what meaning that color has. And if it's something that's very precious to her, then you have to find a way to keep that preciousness in her life.
That's, I mean, our vision at Farrow and Ball is that we always say we look at the light, we look at the architecture, but the most important thing is to talk to the client and find what they're going to feel comfortable with, because it's their home. It's not my home, you know. And I think that's a really, really important thing. I think you're absolutely right.
And the opposite to that is if you show a client the specific shade of blue that you think is perfect, and they go, I don't like it, and you keep trying to talk them into it, and then they finally confess. It reminds them of their mean, harsh aunt who they didn't like, who smelled, and the sofa she had. Move on.
So true. You're getting back to blue for a moment, Jamie. You mentioned blue. I can remember the late, great Mario Bowata, the designer, interior designer. You probably knew him. Lots of people knew him. The Prince of Chintz. And he was the first one to tell me that in a room, particularly if it's a small apartment, if you paint the ceiling blue, you always get the feeling that you are attached to the universe. The sky is blue, and therefore it brings an openness into the room. I never forgot about that, and I think about it all the time. I've used it in my own home whenever I have a space that's a little darker, and it really makes all the difference. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because for people living in apartments, that can be a great solution.
Yes.
What color walls would you have with a blue ceiling? Like, just so. Are you would the walls also be blue, or would it be white walls and a blue ceiling?
It could
I'll
be
let Jamie and the decorators enter into that, the interior designers enter into that. How do you feel about the colors that would go with the blue?
I mean, I feel really strongly that in small spaces, I often will use the same colours on the walls on the ceiling, because then you can't sort of see where the walls end and the ceiling begins, and it always makes the room feel bigger. And it's so counterintuitive. If you say to somebody, I'm going to paint your ceiling blue, and like, oh no, you can't possibly do that. But often I'll paint a room, you know, like that, and the people won't even notice. It just feels incredibly calm because you haven't got sort of defining white square. And just go back to what Lee was saying about, you know, blue ceilings in the universe. I do loads of blue ceilings for children. We keep coming. Isn't that strange? We keep talking about children. And it's something that they love.
Right. You know, for me, a blue is, I consider it what I call a crossover color, because I believe that one of my concepts is that there are 18 to 20 crossover colors that will work with every other color, because they're colors that we're most accustomed to seeing in nature. And because most people look very optimistically at a blue sky, when you were a small child, mommy said, it's not raining, you can go outside and play. It's always happy memories. And so if you bring that blue sky in, the eye is already accustomed to seeing a blue sky with a myriad of other colors. You know, every floral color, all the greens, they all work with a blue sky. So I think if you can kind of weave the story around it, to get people more attached to the idea of nature and how you can use color within a natural frame, that really helps to explain why it's acceptable.
Quentin, are you going to paint your ceiling blue?
I want to paint my whole house multicolors. As soon as I'm not renting in New York, I'm going to paint the whole thing, and I'm going to get you all to recommend exactly how I should approach it. Hold my hand every step of the way.
Wes, is there a color that you think repeats more than any other in your collections, one after another?
You know, I'm going to say yellow, because to me, yellow is a go-to color for me, like in the arsenal of colors and in my pocket of adding that just energy and that vibrancy.
And optimism.
An optimism, a boldness. Nothing really does that like a yellow, like a really pure marigold, or a color that we've used 3 seasons now. We call it taxi cab yellow. Because when you get that right shade of yellow, it is so vibrant and so alive in a way that it speaks louder and more clearly almost than any other color on the runway. So, you know, I'll always think, oh, I just did that last season, but regardless, I keep bringing it back and I keep bringing it back. And it makes the most beautiful combinations, like with certain blues. A bright, bold yellow is amazing. There's a lot you can do with it. So I would probably say yellow. Officially, our Herrera color is red. We have a beautiful shade of Herrera red. It's a specific Pantone shade. We use it on everything from our packaging to the awnings of our store to the labels in our clothes. And it's an iconic part of the house. And it's something that every season we have some beautiful red gowns. We have an icon collection of pieces that are black, white, and red that are always in the store and never marked down, that are always kind of elegant, chic pieces. So red is certainly another answer, but the kind of the more wild card one I would say is yellow. Lee, we've gotten this question 6 times. Could you explain a little bit around the process for choosing the Pantone color of the year, please? And maybe for some of our viewers who aren't familiar with what that is, what that means.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say before mentioning the color of the year, which is classic blue for this year, that it is not a question of dogma or dictating to the color world or the whole world that this is the color you must be using. First and foremost is the messaging that goes with the color. What does the color say? And so we go through a huge process the year before of, you know, waiting it out to see directions where we're going. Many of us that do this at Pantone have traveled the world. Of course, that's changed considerably in the last few months, but we still have access to seeing things that are happening in other parts of the world. So our travels lead us down that path. Of course, the messaging I mentioned first, we look at art collections, we see if there's a particular artist whose work is being shown, and now art is going from museum to museum. It's not staying in one place, and it's not the elite kind of thing that it used to be before that was only available to certain people. We can all see what artists are doing when we look online. We can see what's happening, we read about it. Certainly the world of entertainment. What are the films that are being booked for next year or being made or going to be released? Is there a color story in that? It's not just what the stars are wearing, but what's the story about? Is there anything that's going to be happening next year, like a big event as far as sports are concerned? Where is that going to be held? What is the city it's being held in? Is there a color that goes along with that city that's generally associated with that? So there are, and of course fashion plays into it, because the fashion designers, as you well know, are first to push the envelope, to put something out there that perhaps is a little ahead of its time. So we look at that. There's just so many areas we have to look at. Yes, yes, the question.
Do you ever think about the political or the economic climate? Does that affect what your choice is?
Absolutely. When we think about the symbolism of the color, of course, we're looking at the whole socioeconomic picture as well. And we do pull that into our thinking. It's not the end all and the be all, but it's definitely part of our thinking process. So it's a broad spectrum, if you pardon the pun, of ideas and concepts that we look into. And then we eventually come to a meeting of the minds. And in choosing the classic blue, we wanted something that spoke to the past, gathering up ideas and concepts from the past, values from the past. But at the same time, classic blue can have a very futuristic aspect. It's the color that you see far beyond us, you know, twilight blue sky, what's lying out there in the sky beyond that. What about space travel? So all of that encapsulated itself into the Pantone Classic Blue. A long-winded answer to your question.
Sorry, no, there's a fascinating answer. I really, that was different than what I was expecting you to say. I thought it was more based on kind of data points and less philosophical and emotional. That was fascinating. And that tees me up for what I'd like to do as our closing exercise, guys. I'm gonna you know, a lot of people have been asking about the power of color and, you know, does a color have a smell? How does a color make you feel? How does it have a memory? So I'm just going to say a couple of words and we'll just go around rapid fire and you guys just say the first thing that instinctively comes to your mind that represents that color. So if I were to say hope, what color is that for you?
Red.
Yep.
wait, Jamie, what did you say?
Blue.
Blue. Quentin?
Red.
Joa?
I'm yellow.
Lee?
Yellow.
I'm going to go with the blue, like a sky blue for that one too. Okay. Passion.
It's got to be pink, hasn't it?
Yeah, pink.
Is that too obvious? I don't know.
Yeah.
Really?
Hot pink, but it has to be hot, right?
Oh, hot pink. Yeah, hot pink. Fuchsia. Yeah.
Love.
Red.
Black.
Ooh.
Black.
And I want to say white. It's an interesting one though. There's something about the purity. I don't know. That's a really interesting.
The infiniteness of black and white.
Yeah.
For me, it's a kind of a blush tone, something very soft.
I was going to go with the soft pink too. Safety.
With
Orange.
without a doubt, for me, it would be dark green. That feeling of that's a protective feeling of nature around. Me. I mean,
yes, I would agree. Yes, that would be mine. Dark green.
I was thinking of a life vest.
Joe, you've been an influencer, so I'm going with your dark green.
Oh.
Okay, last one. Laughter.
Yellow.
Orange.
Orange.
Rainbow.
Yeah.
Rainbow.
That's nice.
Great. You guys, that brings us to an hour. I think we could keep doing this for, I mean, I could listen to you all speak for days. You're a brilliant group. I'm so grateful to you for joining us at Herrera today for this. I think our viewers have loved it. I've learned a lot. And I think one thing we can all agree is that color's magical. I mean, the anecdotes you've shared, whether it's Mario Buata and painting a ceiling blue to represent the sky, or Joa with the drawers being painted for a child's favorite color, or Jamie, your pillow that your friend spent a year making for you, Quentin, like these combinations of the pink and the red and the black that express your emotions. It's magic, and the way we use it is magic. And my biggest hope is that people become less trepidatious about color and more bold. And, you know, as you brilliantly said, there's nothing cheaper than painting a wall. So, you know, don't be intimidated by color. Try on the dress that's a color you think, even if it's a color you think you don't love. You know, if you're intimidated about making a mistake with your room, just paint one wall, as you guys brilliantly said. You know, it's thank you for the inspiration you've given me and for all of our viewers today. And, you know, thank you for joining us, guys.
Thank you so much. It's been so fun.
Thank you.
It has been.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.